biggest complaint we get from customers when we take feedback off them at interview is, do you know what, Johnny, I liked candidate X or candidate Y. Seemed like a nice guy, but he didn't quite treat the interview like a selling situation. And if you ever ask the customers what do they mean, they'll always say the same old thing. I wanted the candidate to come in and take a little bit of control of the meeting. I wanted him to probe me for what my needs are. I wanted him to prove with some solid, documented evidence that his skills could solve my problem. And at the end of the meeting, I wanted him to close me. So if not offer him the job there and then, which I'm not going to do, but to at least agree a time and date when we'd meet for the next interview. And a lot of people say to me, well, Johnny, it's not really like that. You know, it's a two-way process. It's as important to me that I get it right as it is to them. But the point the clients always make is that the only basis upon which they get to see you in action, the only chance they get to see what you're like as a salesperson, is 1 hour that they have with you in an interview room. And from that, they draw a whole host of analogies and extrapolate them as to how you're going to behave when you're out in the field working for them. And in this series of videos, what we're going to talk about is a process that will enable you to qualify whether the job is right for you or not. And similarly, a process that's going to give you control of whether you do or don't get the job. And it's going to involve some research and some prep and putting together some pretty old school stuff that will work and really enable you to get the most out of every interview you'll go for as a salesperson or as a commercial business person for the rest of your career. Enjoy. So let's talk about how you're going to do the interview. This is based on the article that you can read. You can do one of two things. You can watch this video all the way through, or you can read the article all the way through. Either way, the guarantee I'm going to give you today, before you watch this video, is if you watch this video, read through the document that we've sent you, and take the actions I'm recommending, I promise you, if you follow it to the letter, you will smash every interview you go for. Every employer will want to hire you. Let's begin. So why do I want to talk about interviews? Well, very sadly, I've been in recruitment since the late 90s, believe it or not. I know you don't think so. Well, I have. If you do the maths, I've been involved now in literally thousands upon thousands of interview campaigns and recruitment campaigns. And that can get a bit boring. So what I did was, a while ago, as I said, I've got to start turning this almost into an art form. In many respects, I can just keep my own career going, so I don't go mad. And what I'm going to try and do in the next few minutes is distill some of the years of learning that I've acquired and some of the things I've learned about what makes people successful in interviews for sales jobs and commercial roles into the next however long this video may be. The thing I really think, the first point that I want to get across is the madness of my job as a headhunter and as a recruiter is that the best people don't get the best jobs. And I think that's a really key point for you to think about. Actually, the people who get the jobs, the ones who finish top, and the madness of the whole thing is the ones who have the best careers. They're not the best salespeople out there. They're just the ones who play the interview game better than other people. And in doing so, therefore get the best jobs on the market. And by nature of the fact that they get the best jobs on the market, their careers fly at a higher level than perhaps those of the people who don't play the game. So the first thing is you can't just give people a little bit of the old magic. You can't just pitch up, turn up, smile, be cool, be cute, be good looking, be intelligent, be witty. That's not how it works. You know, we're post-Brexit here. As we shoot this video, we're about to enter into a whole new era as a country. There are a lot of jobs out there right now, but it doesn't matter what's going on in the marketplace. It doesn't matter if there are very few jobs and lots of candidates, or a very large volume of jobs and very few candidates. Where we're getting is there's always an equilibrium point, and there's always a point where the candidate that succeeds is the one that plays the game the best. And the game is a lot more competitive now than it's ever been, predominantly because what we're finding is the IT industry is just hot. It doesn't matter if it's 2009 and we're in a recession. It doesn't matter if we've just left Europe and things have gone dark. The market is hot. Why? Business intelligence market's going to grow to something like $270 billion. Cybersecurity market's going to grow. The IT industry can't go away now, irrespective of the global climate. So there's always going to be a hot market, but there's always going to be challenges for candidates in getting the best jobs, because when the market's good, people come onto the market looking to cash up. So it doesn't matter whether there's loads of jobs and not many candidates, because actually there are more candidates than you think, and the market's more competitive than you think, particularly for that next layer up of jobs. So let's start. What is an interview? An interview is a two-way process in which both parties in the process buy a revenue generation solution. So let's think about that. An interview is not about getting a job. What it's actually about is a process where the customer on this side is buying a revenue generation machine, and the candidate on this side is also buying a revenue generation machine. And both people, during that process, go through a purchase process mentally, psychologically, and emotionally. A client once pointed out to me a while ago, it was a great analogy he gave me. He said to me once, he said, the thing is, if I get this interview right, it's a lot of difference to me. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, think of it this way. Each of these sales guys driving around the country, I've got 10 people that work for me, and my OTE, my variable element, is another £100,000 on top of my basic salary. So each one mathematically is worth about £10,000 to me out on the road. If he succeeds, he makes me personally, I get another £10,000 of earnings next year. If he fails, I'm 10 grand down. So getting this hiring process right is the difference between Barbados and Benidorm. And I made a point to the client, said, that's great, it's all about you, it's all about you. What about the candidate? And he said, that's absolutely great, and I accept that actually it's even bigger for him, because it's the sole total of his earnings. But the point is, it's a selling process, and I get sold to first, because I'm the one that's buying. And the candidates that get the jobs are the ones who lock into what is actually fear. Clients are scared of getting it wrong, in the same way that your customers are scared of making bad procurements and bad procurement decisions. So the first thing to understand is that the candidates that do really, really well in the interview process, they're the ones that lock into the fact that the person sat in front of them in the interview is making a mission-critical procurement decision upon which they will be judged, that could cost them their job if they get it wrong, that could get them promoted if they get it right, and is actually potentially worth a lot of money to them if they personally get it right. And equally, I often say the same thing to the clients, which is the clients that are most attractive to the candidates are the ones who lock into the fact that the candidates are playing for high stakes too. But to really succeed in the interview game, it's about really thinking, what's the other guy thinking? And that's what it is. So what are the hiring managers so scared of? So there's a few key bits really. The first one is, can the candidate prove what he says about himself? They're wondering, are you lying? They're thinking, every salesperson turns up here, tells me that they're great, but is he really? How do I know? So the candidates that are smart, they lock onto the fact that one of the key areas of nervousness that's going on in the interviewer's mind is this guy the real deal? Or is he just some other sales guy who's getting fired from where he is, who's running away before he gets fired because he knows his pipeline's weak, who actually hasn't sold anything for ages? Has he had job after job after job? Is he missing a job after his CV? That's what's going through the interviewer's mind. The next thing that's going through the interviewer's mind is, Am I just one of hundreds of interviews that this guy's going to in a beauty parade for his own services? Or has he really done some significant due diligence? And is he actually here because he's genuinely excited about the job? Because actually one of the things that customers want is they want to be wanted. And actually it's a much bigger buying criteria of what makes them hire people than people realise. The simple fact that the client believes the candidate is excited by and wants the job based on genuine due diligence, research and understanding of the market. That's a big part of it. I'd say 20–30% of a decision is subconsciously made by the client just because they feel that the candidate has a warmth and a desire towards the job himself and isn't deigning to take it. They're scared of being the idiot that hires the idiot. They've got a lot riding on it. If you don't make them money, they don't either. So let's start with some real basics. Appearance. First impressions really do count. And one of the key bits of advice I'd give to anybody, and it does not matter what level you're playing at. It doesn't matter if right now you're a £120,000 basic salary, senior level sales executive. In fact, if anything, if you are asking for a £120,000 basic salary, this is probably more important because the margins of error are tighter. Audit your appearance. Sit down now and start at the start. Look at your shoes, your suit, your shirt. Are you wearing a tie? Are you wearing a blouse? What are you wearing? How do you look? What are your nails like, whether you're a man or a woman? Would you hire you? Do you need a sunbed? Do you need your teeth whitening? I'm not kidding, because actually it's a margin. Because I'll tell you now, good looking people get jobs. Fact. People that look scruffy, my God, they need to have talent to beat a good looking one. Because appearances matter. You may not think they do in this modern day and age, but they do. You know, if you've got candidate one and candidate two, candidate one walks into an interview, he's got a beautiful suit on, he's bought a brand new white shirt, a crisp tie, his shoes are shiny, his hair's been cut, he looks the part, he smells the part, he doesn't smell of fags. Versus candidate two, who's thought, I'm just the top guy, I'll pitch up. I had a candidate do it the other week, he's actually turned up to an interview for a £120,000 job in a short sleeved shirt and a pair of slacks. And the client actually said to me, he said, he seems great, but I couldn't get over the arrogance of it. It was just arrogant. Read Malcolm Gladwell, Blink. People make massive amounts of their decision in a very short period of their time. It's called rapid cognition. And that rapid cognition is based on how you look, the vibe of you, the energy of you as you walk through the room. They take 20 seconds to make the decision and then spend the rest of the interview trying to justify the cognitive bias. So it's worth doing. Your pen, your pad. It's the little things, those attentions to detail that sometimes are the difference between a top candidate getting a top job and a mediocre candidate not. And the clients don't realise they're auditing it. Clients don't realise they're checking out your appearance. Clients don't realise cognitively and consciously they're checking out your shoes. They don't realise consciously and cognitively they're checking out your nails on your hand. They don't know, but subconsciously they're checking it out. They're checking it out for a frame of reference against lots of other images that they've taken in their mind of people who are top candidates, top people they've met. It's like they're going through this massive filing system of what is good and comparing you to all the files they've got of what is good to check if you equals good. And you might think this guy's mental, this Johnny Graham obsessing about how do you look for interviews. And I'm stood here in, hey, a tweed blazer and a checked shirt, but I'm not the one going for an interview today. And if I was, let me tell you now, I'd be in a suit with a navy suit, a white shirt and a blue tie. Oh, by the way, no red ties. Red means no. Pretty simple. Next bit, research. Everybody comes to me at the moment and I meet a lot of people who are nervous about the job market. If anything, if you look at the job market as it is now, it's very different to how it was, say, back in 2008, 2009, when Mike and I first started Inward Revenue Consulting. At that time, if it was a job of any sort and you were in the interview room, it was good because there were that few jobs out on the market. Now we've got a lot more jobs. And part of your role as an interviewee is to make sure that you've done due diligence for two reasons. One, you've got to know for yourself. Two, actually, the research that you do and the depth of the research that you do is an immediate and immense differentiator of you as a candidate. I would say 90% of candidates don't go anywhere near the depth of research that you ought to be going to when you're in the job market. And the thought that you put into your interview, it's your opportunity to separate yourself, but at the same time know what's right about the job. So most people start their research, they go onto the company website. It's just not enough. It won't help you. So let's think of this in a different way. When you go for a job, you're not really going for a job. It's important to start thinking about jobs in a different way. For argument's sake, let's just say you're going for a job right now on a £50,000 basic salary. I'm here to tell you today, and I promise you, you're not on £50,000 a year. Your basic salary is nothing, because basic salaries do not exist. A basic salary is a loan against performance. So let's think about this. They lend you money until such time as you perform and justify your existence in the business. But equally, if we philosophically think about it, you're going to earn 50 grand somewhere next year if you're a 50k guy, unless you're a complete muppet and you keep getting fired after 3 months. The reality is you're going to earn 50 grand somewhere. So if I gave you £50,000 right now and said, you've got to go and invest it in the stock market or in a company. Here's this company. I'd like you to go and meet them because I want you to invest your £50,000 in that company with a potential 100% return on that investment, plus a bit of time and energy over the first year. How much research would you do? How deeply would you think about that? Because that's the level that you should be researching a job. You should be looking at it as if you were going to research for an investment of £50,000 or 60 or 70 or £100,000. Are you going to invest your money in that job? If you were to buy stock, if I put a gun to your head and said, go buy 100 grand's worth of shares tomorrow, you'd sweat buckets over your research. And that's the depth you've got to go to. Company's house, mystery shopping. There's nothing you shouldn't know about that company before you walk through the door. Reason two, let's look at it in a different way. If you watch Dragon's Den on TV, the dragons, who do they invest in? They invest in the people who pitch, who really know their stuff. How big is the market? If you're getting for a job in the analytics market, and I turn around to you and said, so what you want me to do is give you £100,000 next year, basic salary to come and sell software in the analytics market. How big's the analytics market? How big's the market for this product? Who are the top 10 key competitors of this product? Where do we stand against those top 10 key competitors and why? Have you seen the product? Have you looked at the product? Have you been to see any of your existing customers who might have the product? Who do you know who's got the product? I'd want to know before I invested my £100,000 in you that you had a cogent plan and that you knew this market. Go on Dragon's Den, look it up. Every company that gets invested by the dragons are the ones where they know their numbers. Particularly Duncan Bannatyne, he always only invests in the ones who know their numbers deeply. Their own numbers in terms of sales forecast, but particularly how big's the market? What's the market? What's this? What's that? Who is the market? They're looking for the people who understand actually truly where the opportunity is for the product. So start with the website, company's house, the product, the service, the tech. You can get a lot of analyst report without spending money. You know, I looked for one the other day, IDC's report on the business analytics market. My God, there was a lot of information there. Competition, go deep. You should be able to prepare a business plan based on the research that you do to buy a franchise, you've got to look at it like you're asking them to invest £100,000 or £50,000 or £62,000 in you to buy a franchise in their business and pay them back over a period of time until you make profit. And the candidates that get the jobs, the ones that blow the jobs out of the water, the ones who are miles ahead at the end of a round of first interviews, they're always the ones who knew something from a research perspective where the client was sat there in the interview going, wow, this guy knows his stuff. I like you. So your goals, understand the job and make some smart decisions. Position yourself as the most switched on of all the candidates in the frame, and to make the interviewer feel special irrespective of how you feel like you want to work there. You might not want the job at the end of the process. You might do the research and realise the job's not right. But then I've done my job because you've done that. As your recruiter, that's great, I'm cool with that. The client's cool with that and you've got to be cool with that. But that's the quality of research you've got to go to. Next bit is, you've got to prepare serious amounts of cold, hard evidence. Clients are scared, I've already told you that. In a close run battle, the evidence that you produce in your interview is the next differentiator, and we're going to talk about that more in a couple of minutes. Why? Because you sell on ROI and referenceability, don't you? Why do your customers buy off you? They ask for a reference site. They ask for proof. They want to see another customer using the software in anger and look the guy in the eye and say, how was your investment, mate? But they can't do that when they're buying you. You know, I'm sat here now and I'm talking to a camera. It's a beautiful looking camera. It's mine. It's my personal kit. When I bought that camera, I looked on YouTube for hours on end. I reckon I've watched 200 reviews before I bought that camera. But when they're buying a candidate, when they're buying a revenue generation solution, they can't go on YouTube. They can't look up candidate X on YouTube and get a review. What they want is that. They want to be able to look under the bonnet. They want to know, are you any good at what you do? They want to kick your tires. They want to feel the leather on the seats before they buy it, but they can't. But the smart candidates that get the jobs, the ones that nail it, they lock onto that fact. And they turn up with cold, hard evidence, P60s, proof of deals won, commission sheets, awards, emails from their bosses. And we'll talk about how to use them as we move on. It's about making it easy for the client to say yes to giving you a second interview at the end of the interview. So what sort of evidence should you be taking into an interview? Your P60s, your pay slips. Clients will never ask you for a P60 or a pay slip. I can't remember the last time a client asked a candidate of mine for their P60, but your ability, the ability during an interview to be able to start talking about your target achievement, the ability for you to be able to turn around to the interviewer and say, would you like to see my P60? Is monumentally powerful. The client will go, oh no, that's okay. It's like a bluff in a game of poker. The fact that you've offered it, the fact that you've had the courage to offer it, the fact that you've had the temerity to say, want to look at my P60, mate? That's right, I'm the real deal. I sell stuff and I've got the P60s to prove it. And to have them in a folder with you in the interview, that is powerful, powerful, powerful stuff. Some people worry, they go, well, I've had a bad year or two. Well, there's a reason why everybody's looking for a job, and we can come to that. At the end of the video and at the end of this session of Little Films, what we'll do is we'll overcome some of the key objections and we'll work on those as we go. One of the key things I like to see, and one of the key bits of advice if you said to me, what's the best way to do it, is to have a printed document highlighting your achievement to target for at least the last 5 years. You can see there's a diagram of one here on the slides, so that you separate the jobs out, company X, company Y, company Z, and you can separate them into separate roles. And sometimes you don't hit targets. You know, actually, I was talking to a client the other day. He made a great point to me about a candidate who walked into the interview, who turned around and said, listen, if I'm really honest, last year's been a complete disaster for me and I've sold nothing, and that's why I'm looking for a job. And the client said to him, why have you sold nothing? And he said, well, I had a few personal problems at the start of the year. It distracted me. I took my foot off the gas. I didn't do enough prospecting. And by the time I caught back up, I was miles behind and I got fired. And the client went, he's my candidate. I like him. Versus all the other guys who are a little bit blasé, because do you know what? The year before that, he had his P60s and his pay slips. Some of them weren't mega. But what was amazing was when the client said to him, what was your target last year? He'd say it was £884,000. What did you achieve in that year? £716,222. The client went, that's a guy whose targets matter to him. It bothers him whether he is or isn't hitting his target. It bothers him whether he is or isn't living off his basic salary. So you don't have to have year upon year of 120% target achievement, but that graph of achievement against target, when the client turns around to you and says, well, I'm looking for a guy who can prove to me he can hit his targets, I'm looking for a guy who can prove to me he can hit his targets, the ability to pull it out of a portfolio or a folder and put it in front of a client and say, there you go, here's my achievement against target for the last 5 years. That's powerful stuff. Award certificates, proof of having gone on club trip, a well done email printed out from your boss. The other one that sometimes people take for granted but should take to interviews are references. Not LinkedIn testimonials because they're too easy to throw away and they're too easy to give. I'm talking about real references. If you're on your way out of a business, particularly, for example, I was talking to a candidate the other day who was in a compromise agreement situation, get a reference to whom it may concern as part of your compromise agreement, or get someone somewhere that you've worked for to sign them. Turn up with a raft of them in a folder. So when the client turns around to you and says, listen, I'm looking for somebody who's a really good guy, you can say, oh, by the way, before I go, I'd just like to leave a copy of some of the references that people have written for me throughout my years in sales, some references throughout my career. That is powerful, powerful stuff. And if I've got 2 candidates in a campaign and one is sat in the interview with a portfolio, I'm talking about an old-fashioned bloody brag file here. If one of them turns up with his brag file and in it there are P60s, pay slips, a document outlining his achievement against target in graphical visual format over the last 5 years, references, case studies of deals they've won and how they won them. If it's a tight campaign between 2 candidates and the other guy's just a cheeky, chappy, charismatic salesman with a little bit of pizzazz, I'll tell you now, the guy with the portfolio wins every single time. Let's talk about case studies, because this is a big one for me. And the candidates I find who do really well turn up to interviews with case studies of deals they've won. And I'll explain why. Go back to the last really big purchase that you personally made. Was it a camera like the one I'm looking at now? Was it a car like the one that sat outside this studio? Why did you buy it? Why? I'll tell you why. Was it something you read? Was it something you saw? Was it something you heard? Was it the feel of your hand on the leather of the steering wheel of the car? As I've already said in these videos, I like to watch YouTube videos before I make a purchase. I bought a camera gimbal earlier on this weekend for shooting video for Inward Revenue Consulting. As you know, we like to shoot a bit of video. And I must have watched 20 YouTube videos before I made that purchase and knew it was the right one. And I'm going to use it this afternoon. It's in a box in my car. Hiring a salesperson is high involvement, but remember, the customer doesn't get to watch YouTube videos. He doesn't get to go on Digital Photography World and read a review of the latest Dave Smith candidate. He doesn't get that. The candidates who get the jobs emotionally take the client and the hiring manager through that place. The next bit, most experienced professionals don't know how they do what they do, as they are what we call unconsciously competent. So if you're going for an interview and a client asks you to talk them through a deal, which is very common, what most people do is they go very, very surface level. Oh, well, how did you win that? Oh, well, I built a good relationship. Well, how did you build a good relationship? What was it specifically you did in the process of winning that deal that made the relationship as good as it has? So most people very rarely demonstrate the value they add to a deal. And clients will always ask you to talk through a deal, and let's do it again. 2 candidates in the frame. Candidate 1 turns up and says, yeah, I won that deal. It was a really good deal and we built a good relationship with the client, but he doesn't really fully articulate where it was that he personally added value. The other candidate turns up with a documented case study. I thought you'd want to talk about one of my deals, Mr. Hiring Manager. Therefore, what I did in advance was prepare a couple of case studies of deals I've won that we could talk through today that best exemplify how I make the difference as to whether a deal has or hasn't been won. Here, let me talk you through this deal right now. And out of his briefcase or out of his portfolio comes this case study where he shows how strategically he mapped the deal. I had one candidate a while ago, I thought it was very, very elegant. He turned up at an interview with a folder full of Miller Hyman blue sheets. And the client said, what's this? And he said, well, whenever I get a deal on the go above a certain value, every Monday morning I write a blue sheet for that deal. I start from scratch and I rewrite it based on the previous one from the week before, and then I keep them. So chronologically I can look back as to how I'm progressing through managing that deal to its conclusion. Believe it or not, he got the job versus the guy who pitched up and tried to give him a bit of the old magic. The value add, let's think about that. I was talking to a client the other day and they interviewed a guy who was ex-IBM. The point the client made to me was he said, I like the guy. He seems really good, but I can't quite work out whether the deals are because of him or because he worked for IBM. And these are big deals we've won, and I need a guy who, if he gets run over by a bus the next morning, I need that to be a disaster, not just another swappable guy who's representative of a brand. So the point that the clients are looking for is, and again, it's an unconscious thing. Hiring managers don't know that they're looking for the layer of value add that you bring to the deal, but they are. It's subconscious. No one's trained them how to do interviews. But what they're actually looking at when they ask you to talk them through a deal is they want to see where you've exerted influence, where you've exerted difference, where you've made a change in the outcome of the sale itself. And often we meet a lot of people, you know, let's get it right. The market is bloody good right now. IT is hot. Software is hot. Technology is hot. And as somebody once famously said, a rising tide floats all boats. Everybody's boat floats. The question is, are you a boat that makes a difference, or are you just part of the rising tide? And when people, the really great jobs are handed out, they get handed out to the guys that customers and clients look at and think, this guy's the difference between hit and target and not. So what I want you to do is think about 2 or 3 deals that you've won. And I want you to prepare written, documented case studies of how you won them. Now, different people do it in different ways. I had one candidate do it the other week where he prepared 3 beautiful looking mind maps, which he pulled out of his portfolio, put on the desk, and the client leaned over the desk and the candidate leaned over the desk and they talked through the deals. And he showed, you know, very visually where the hot spots were. I had another candidate do it where he just prepared 3 PowerPoint slides. Personally, I don't like the 3 PowerPoint slide idea. I don't like people to turn up with written, printed PowerPoint slides. And I particularly don't like people to turn up and boot up their laptop in a first interview. It's a shit idea, frankly. So me, written, documented case studies in a folder, old school. You know, they're called site sellers when I first came into sales. We used to have this thing when I worked at Parcelforce where in the days before laptops, believe it or not, you'd flip over the thing to present to people so that they could see your documentation and your proof. But it's a very powerful, very analog, very physical thing to use in a selling situation that's as emotive and as highly charged as selling your services to a client and the client selling their services to you. So what to think about in a case study? Who was the client? How was the deal instigated? If you're going for a new business job and your top 3 deals and case studies are deals that came off metaphorically the fax machine or came from marketing or were booked for you by an SDR, are you really a killer new business guy? Well, it might be that you're a killer new business guy providing somebody provides you with leads, but are you really demonstrating your ability to generate new opportunities? What was the value of the deal? How long was the campaign? Who were the stakeholders involved? How did you compete with the other competitors? What was your competitor's strategy? What was your strategy? And why did you win? Why? What was it that you personally did? Not what the team did. I hear it a lot when we're working on this with candidates, and where the clients will be concerned. They'll say, oh, I was talking him through a deal, and his only real answer as to why he won the deal was because he'd built a good relationship. Well, I mean this in the nicest possible way, and I rant about this a lot on LinkedIn. It's taken as read that you've built a good relationship. You're in bloody sales, for God's sake. It's your job to build good relationships. The real question is, what did you do around that relationship that exerted influence? That's the bit for which you get paid the real bucks. The other thing that will kill you quicker than a bullet in the head is talking about we. We did this, we did that. It immediately says to the client that you did not lead that deal. If you can, demonstrate structure in your approach in these case studies where necessary. If you're Miller-Hyman trained, TAS, SPIN, it doesn't matter if you're trained in the most obscure sales methodology on earth. If you follow a methodology and you have method in your madness, clients want that. They want to know that what you've got is repeatable and scalable in you as an individual and as a hire. And it should be demonstrated in these case studies. And finally, one more reiteration. They should be in written format, in a folio that you can take out of your bag in the interview, because when the client says to you, well, what I'm looking for is somebody who can talk me through a couple of deals now, you can say, I thought you'd want to talk through a couple of deals today, Mr. Customer. Let me show you a couple of examples of deals I've won. Okay, so you've prepared a portfolio of evidence that you can turn up at the interview with. You've researched the client, you look $1 million, you've got in your car, and you've pitched up at the interview. Oh, by the way, if it's a long way away, stay the night before, please. So it's the start of the interview. You walk in the room, you sit down, and pretty much every client starts every interview with the same old thing. Tell me a bit about you. How are you going to respond? Well, the first thing to remember is 99.9% of the clients that we work with have had no training, so that's the question they're going to ask. And it is a pivotal moment in the meeting, because in that moment, one of you is either going to take complete control, which is not something either of you really want, or it's going to become a quality exchange of resources. And remember, the biggest complaint we get from clients is they'll say the candidate didn't treat the interview like a selling situation. And if you ask them what they mean by that, they'll usually say the same old things. I wanted him to come in and take control of the meeting, or some of it. I wanted him to probe me for my needs. I wanted him to prove to me that his skills could solve my problem. And at the end of the interview, I wanted him to close me to, if not offer him the job there and then, which is very unlikely, but to at least agree a time and date when we'd meet for a next stage. So think about it. What are you going to say if it's a selling situation? The best way to think about it is, what's your elevator pitch? You've got to give that interviewer a very quick, brief elevator pitch. And a good way to do that is, I don't know if you've ever seen the film Toy Story, where you've got all the toys on the shelves, Buzz Lightyear, Woody, Bullseye, and each one's got the key features and benefits of why you would buy them. So Buzz Lightyear's got expanding wings, and he says, to infinity and beyond, and all that other stuff. If I was to put you in a box and make a toy out of you and sell you in the shops, if I had to make a you doll made by Mattel and sold at Toys R Us, if Toys R Us still exists, what would it say on the side of the box? That's your elevator pitch. And you have to go back to the very basics of selling. And actually, the irony of often the candidates that do the best in the interview game are the ones who approach it in the least sophisticated, most simple way. So the first thing I want to encourage you to think about is, what's your USP as a candidate? What are the features and benefits of you? And what is your personal, your unique selling point? What's your value proposition? You know, You spend your life thinking about the value proposition of what you're selling for your employers right now. But actually, the most important value proposition you need to know is what's your value proposition. So for example, if you've sold to the blue light sector for 17 years, then your value proposition or part of your pitch is, well, there isn't a decision maker I don't know in the blue light sector. If, for example, you haven't missed target in 5 years, then part of your value proposition is, my name's Bill Smith and I haven't missed a target in 5 years. So I'll give you an example of a good pitch for the point at which they say to you, tell me about you. Remember, it's a selling situation, so we've got to be punchy. I'm Mr. X, I'm 43 years old, I'm married with 2 kids, brackets, feature. So it's great for you to know I'm hungry and motivated to succeed, brackets, benefit. I've been in sales now for over 20 years, feature, and I've developed a lot of experience in the finance sector, feature. So it's great for you to know I have a lot of strong contacts to help me get a deal done quickly, benefit. Now I'm conscious I could sit here all day talking about myself, and I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for in this hire, and let's work out whether we can help each other. And that's the killer bit. I'm going to do it again. I'm conscious I could sit here all day talking about me. I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about what you're looking for, and let's work out whether we can help each other. And at that point, you've taken a little bit of control back. You don't want to take all the control of the meeting because that's going to be overbearing. And nobody wants to hire an overbearing, aggressive salesman. But at that point, the candidates that can do that make the meeting much more collaborative, much more like a situation between a salesperson who is selling a solution and a customer who's buying a solution. So then at that point, if you can do that, the meeting will follow a simple structure. Now there's an irony, and I've talked about this earlier on in the session, about how actually sometimes the candidates that tend to do really well in interviews are the ones who are used to quite tactical selling. Because remember, whilst it's a strategic procurement, it's a tactical sales process. But the meeting should follow a simple structure. Open, elevator pitch, take a little bit of control. Probe for needs, match and prove that you can solve the problem, and close. And then at the end of the meeting, you should be able to work through the meeting, match and prove. So at that point, the client starts talking. They'll usually start with, okay, well, they'll start talking through the spec. They'll start talking through their needs. They'll start talking through what they want. And at that point, it's your job to take each need and cover it with evidence. So if they say to you, I'm looking for a guy who can prove to me he can hit his targets, you can say, I thought you'd want to talk about that, Mr. Customer. What I've got here is some documents that demonstrate my achievement against target over the last 5 years. If the interviewer says to you, I'm looking for a guy who can generate activity himself, you say, I thought you'd want to talk about that, Mr. Customer. What I've got here is a list of key wins I've made over the last 2 years. The ones I've highlighted in the document are all ones that I self-generated. Let me talk them through with you now. In fact, I've actually got a case study that demonstrates how I self-generated that opportunity and how I got in with that CEO at a very early stage in the campaign. Would you like to talk about that? Yes, I would, Mr. Candidate. Great. And then at that point, you might say to the client, what else are you looking for in a candidate? And he might say, I'm looking for a guy who understands the public sector. I thought you'd want to talk about that. I've been selling into the public sector for the last 17 years. Let me explain to you some of the clients I've won and some of the things I've learned about the market. Because what we don't want here is a chat. Oh, we had a good chat. I can tell you now, when I take interview feedback, and the candidate comes on the phone and says it was a good chat, I might as well just put the phone down. He's US. He's on US, as we say in recruitment. U/S. Unsuccessful. He's failed. He's blown. If it was a quote-unquote good chat, he's blown it. The candidates that do well are the ones that come off the phone and they say to me, good interview that, I understand exactly what he's looking for. I think I've got a very good match to his skill set. He believes I have too, and we've both agreed to meet again next Tuesday at 10. That is driving forward the meeting. So Remember what we're doing. We're going to open, we're going to pitch, we're going to take a little bit of control, not all of it. We're going to probe for needs. We're going to prove that we can solve each problem individually. Now, the guys that do really, really well here, they will open up a nice notebook during the course of the meeting and they will draw a line down the middle of the page. And as they go through the meeting and they probe the customer for his needs, and if I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell you how to probe a customer for his needs. As they probe the interviewer for his needs, they'll write on the left-hand side the requirement. And then on the right-hand side, when they've covered it and discussed it and demonstrated to the client that they can solve that problem, they'll put a tick by it. It's a very powerful analog mark that shows visually to the customer, the interviewer, that you're solving their problem for them, that you're helping them buy that revenue generation solution. So the next bit is the close of the interview. You've turned up at the interview, you're really well prepared. You've researched the company, competitors, the job, the product, there's nothing you didn't know. You look $1 million, the meeting's opened, you've hit them with a great little elevator pitch, you've turned up with your portfolio, you've probed the interviewer for his needs, you've demonstrated against each need how you can successfully solve the problem, and we've got to the end of the interview. I would say 1 in 10 candidates, if that, close interviews properly. In fact, I think that the sales profession itself has changed quite considerably in the last few years, and people simply aren't closing in general in life. And as I said earlier on, rising tides do float all boats. And a lot of people are succeeding right now because they live in the rising tide, not because actually they're asking the hard questions in their selling situations. But that is a whole other argument that you can watch on A Pint with JG. Very few people do this bit properly. And one of the biggest complaints I get when I ask the client, why didn't you take the candidate forward to the next stage? Often the client will say to me, he was all right. He had me eating out of, I was eating out of his hand. And then he didn't close me, and he didn't move the meeting forward to a next conclusion. And these clients aren't talking about an aggressive, nailed-down close here. They're talking about the candidate's ability to create what they call in spin selling a continuation or an advance of the sale. They advance it in a solid way. So first things first, the first thing you do not ask is, what are the next steps? Do not ask that in an interview. Why? Because in a tactical, fast-moving process like this, it might work out in the field in strategic sale, particularly if you sell into healthcare or public sector. But in a fast-moving sale, you get a pinned down definitive point. So the candidates that ask, what are our next steps, usually get the following answer. Our next steps are that I've got lots of other candidates to see and I'll come back to you. This is how the candidates that get the jobs do it. They get their notepad, the one in which they drew a line down the middle of the page, and they say, okay, let's do a little bit of a summary here. This is a very unsophisticated way of doing it, but it works. So you told me you were looking for the following things. 1, the ability to win new business and generate appointments. 2, somebody who could prove that they were good at hitting targets. 3, somebody who knew the market. 4, etc., etc. And we covered them, and you were happy with that, and you were happy with that, and you were happy with that, and you were happy with that. Question 1. Is there anything I've missed? No. Are you sure? Yes. Great. And this is the key question you ask. Is there any reason you won't take this to the next stage? And the client says, no. And you say, great. When should we do it? At that point, you get your diary out of your bag and make the next appointment there and then. The candidates that get the next appointment, if you said to me, 2 candidates, one comes out the interview with the next appointment in his diary, and the other comes out with the client saying, I've got more candidates to see, I'll tell you who I'm going to bet's going to get the job. So let's go through it again. Summarize. Create your habitual agreement. Close and diarise. Habitual should say mutual. Apologies, slight typo on the slide which we'll fix later. Create your mutual agreement, close and diarise. Let's talk about diarising the meeting. A lot of people feel embarrassed to do that. Okay, great, when do you want to do it? Dead simple, easy question to ask. I once went to a meeting with a colleague of mine, and at the time, they were very cheeky. We were a law firm selling to a group of partners, one of the Magic Circle law firms selling software. And the meeting came to an end, and the individual concerned went round the room and said, "You happy yet? You happy? Everybody happy yet? Great. Any reason why we can't take this to the next stage and final demonstration?" "No." "Great. Let's get it diarised." And the clients all sat there and said, "Oh, well, we'll have to talk to our secretaries." And my colleague just sat there, opened up a laptop and went, "I'll wait." And we were a small little player at the time. Nobody knew who we were. And we had no right to be in that room compared to the bigger players in the market. But the reason we won that deal was the cheeky smile with which my colleague opened up a laptop and went, "I'll wait." And they all went, "Wait for what?" And she said, "I'll wait whilst your PAs all come down and we sort out the next meeting before I leave." And we sat in this meeting room. It took 4 hours. And after a while, PAs came in and we sorted it out. And we found a next appointment and we walked out of there with the next demo in the diary for 2 weeks hence. And we nailed a much bigger player. Getting the date in the diary matters. The candidate that walks out of the interview with a date in their diary and a definitive agreement for a next stage, they get jobs. They get the best jobs. They do a lot better than the candidate that walks out of an interview and says to me, "Oh yeah, Jonathan, yeah, he said he'd come back to me." Because I'll tell you what, you know, when you walk out of an appointment having been to see a customer and the customer says to you, "Yeah, I'll come back to you," you know you've had a bad day. So think about that. I know it's not easy. I know it's more brash than you ordinarily might be, but it's important to remember what we talked about at the start of this series of videos, which is it's a buying process for both parties. It's a strategic procurement, but it's sold in a tactical manner. And unlike the deals that you're used to working, which can sometimes be 6, 12, 18 months, this is done in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe 4, depending on the time of year. So the candidates that do well lock on to the speed and they close and sell accordingly to the time scale of the deal process of selling the solution that is themselves to the customers. So to summarize, 1, remember, the biggest complaint we get from clients is that the candidate didn't treat the interview like a selling situation. And by that, what they always mean is the candidate didn't come in, take control of the meeting, probe for needs, prove that their skills could solve the problem, and at the end of the meeting, close them. 2, research like you are buying shares in the business. 3, prep evidence like you're going on Dragon's Den and take control. Probe for needs, prove with the evidence in your portfolio that you can solve the problem, and finally, close. Old school for another meeting with times and dates. Good luck.